What's going on, everybody? Jagan here, and welcome back to another One Piece discussion video. And by the title of this, I'm sure you can guess it will be another bounty prediction video. Last time I did a video like this, it was predicting the Straw Hats and Supernova bounties after Wano. So if you're interested in that, the link will be in the description below. But in this video, I will be predicting the current bounties for a lot of the big name figures in the world whose bounties we do not know yet. This will include people like Keen, Marco, the red-haired pirate subordinates, the former Shishibukai bounties, as well as some of the Revolutionary Army members. One faction that I will not be including is the Blackbeard pirates because, one, I don't believe there's enough information to gauge yet, and I know I just said that I'd be doing the Revolutionaries, who we also don't have a lot of information on, but the main difference in that is that I believe the Blackbeard pirates will get major increases later on, whereas the Revs, I think whatever their bounty is now, except an exception to that would be Sabo, because I think he'll linear get a lot of increases. But as far as the Revolutionary Commanders, I think they're going to stay around the threat level that they possess right now. Whereas the Blackbeard Pirates are set up for, being endgame antagonists for the Straw Hats on Raftel. So I believe if they have a bounty right now, that it will likely increase again. Because, Blackbeard's bounty is 2.2 billion, right? It's by far the lowest of the Yonko. And it wouldn't make sense for Blackbeard to stay at that bounty, so I'm going to use the same logic for his crew. I expect Blackbeard to be, very high in the 5 to 6 billions by the end of the series. And I expect his commanders to also have some linear progression like that. So for the sake of this video, I won't be including people like, Shiru, Burgess, Lafayette, and other Blackbeard commanders. So we're going to start this video off with Keen the Wildfire, Kaido's top calamity. We know how much Oda loves to hype up his top commanders, and Keen has been no different so far. He's had fantastic portrayal throughout the Wano arc, making cool and calm decisions under pressure, such as when he attacked Big Mom's ship and prevented them from getting up the waterfall, as well as summoning the Toby Roppo of his own accord to help with Yamato's escape. So, based on this portrayal, and as well as the fact that Oda has waited so long to reveal it, remember, he could have revealed it a lot earlier, but we got Queen's bounty back in Udon Prison in Act 2, and there's been plenty of opportunities so far in Onigashima to reveal his bounty, so we know that Oda is waiting for an extremely hype or just maybe the correct moment to do so. So the other factor I use to determine what I think Keen's bounty is just the fact that they are of a similar structure to the Big Mom Pirates. Their captains are both physical monsters who are allied under rocks and have 3 commanders with multiple other strong underlings. The captain also has a bounty, Big Mom, who far exceeds the top 3 commanders, as shown when Big Mom's bounty was revealed to be a whole 3.3 billion higher than Katakuri. So there is a massive gap there. So I'm going to assume by this that the gap will be similar to that between Kaido and Keen. The gap between the Sweet Commanders amongst themselves is around 100 million give or take between Cracker, Smoothie, and Katakuri. So I'm expecting the Calamities to have the exact same gap as well. And we know that when Queen's bounty was revealed to be 1.32 billion, so he's around 300 million ahead of Jack, right? So I think a logical prediction for Keen is around 1.66 billion, which is about 300 more than Queen as well, and about 3 billion exactly below Kaido. Next, let's talk about Marco the Phoenix, a pirate who has been around for a long time in the world of One Piece, the former 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, who showed a lot of impressive feats during the Marineford War against the Admirals, as well as someone who was specifically mentioned by the Gorosei in a discussion about the balance of power in the world, being mentioned as somebody who could potentially stop Blackbeard from advancing on Whitebeard's territories. Now, we know that this confrontation between him and Blackbeard when they fought in the Payback War didn't exactly go very well, but I still think the fact that they mentioned him gives very good portrayal to Marco. So, if we're looking at Blackbeard, we know he became a Yonko and has a bounty of about 2.2 billion. So, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense for Marco to be too close to that, but if we look at his track record, it's very impressive. Marco was an apprentice under Whitebeard, which we know how high the success rate is for pirates who are in a situation like that. Shanks was an apprentice of Roger, and Kaido was an apprentice of Rocks, and both turned out to be Emperors of the Sea. So it makes you think it makes you just wonder, how great of a pirate could Marco have been if he was a captain himself? And I think in the time period we've seen Marco act as a leader during Whitebeard's absence, that the Marines are taking him very serious as a threat. So my final prediction for Marco is higher than Keen, higher than a commander, but lower than Blackbeard, who's an emperor. I think Marco gets around 1.85 billion. So next we have the rest of the red-haired pirates besides Shanks. And if you told me a couple years ago that we'd know Shanks' bounty before the rest of his subordinates, I'd call you crazy for that. Oda really threw us a curveball in chapter 957 with those reveals. But luckily, 957 also gave us some great implications of how his subordinates are viewed throughout the world, right? They specifically refer to his subordinates by name and emphasize how they have the best balance of any pirate crew and a high average bounty across the board, which makes sense considering how small their crew is, what the structure of their crew is, in comparison to the likes of Kaido and Big Mom. It's very, very clearly a different structure, much more similar to the Roger Pirates and the Straw Hat Pirates. Quality over quantity, a small amount of select few individuals who are extremely impressive compared to having crews that are consisting of thousands and thousands of members. And this honestly means a lot, especially considering we just went over how massive the bounty gap is between Big Mom and Kaido to their respective first subordinates Katakuri and presumably King. And that's not going to be the case here. These guys, Yasopp, Rue, and Beckman, are very well known and considered bigger threats than those other commanders. So let's start with Yasopp's bounty, the father of Usopp and sniper of the red-haired pirates, who most people would agree is probably the fourth strongest and most wanted in this crew, who Shanks himself sought out in Syrup Village, which goes back to how impressive these guys' reputations are even without Shanks. So, if I were to guess an accurate amount, I'd say that it has to be higher than 1 billion, and the reason for that is because we know that Jack's bounty is 1 billion, which as of right now is the highest amongst pirates who are considered the number 4 of their respective crew. I guess the 4th strongest, the 4th most dangerous, whatever you want to call it. So, for the statement from chapter 957 to be warranted, to have the highest balance and a high average bounty across the board, it cannot be lower than Jack's, or else that statement just does not make sense. So, in my opinion, Yasopp deserves some separation from that, which I think will be around 1,350,000,000, which separates him from Jack, obviously, and even puts him a little bit higher than Queen, whose bounty is right below that. So I think it's a pretty fair number around Queen, and then you put him right below Luffy, who's still considered an Emperor of the Sea right now, regardless of how seriously you take that statement. Luffy's bounty is 1.5 billion, and I think Yasopp being, the number 4 guy, that'd probably be a little too much to go past 1.5, so I'm going to go with 1.35. Alright, next up, Lucky Rue. Somebody who I consider to be pretty underrated by the fandom, actually. I can see why, since he appears to be a pretty goofy character with no real actual combat feats, but don't forget, this is the first man to actually clap somebody in the series, man. Like, this guy can get serious when the time is right. In the Viver card, he's listed as the red-haired pirate's combatant, which means a lot to me personally. Combatants are usually very much respected in the world of One Piece. They're highly regarded as threats, especially if we're talking about a combatant in a Yonko crew that has to warrant something impressive. And if we continue the trend of balance in this crew, which starts from Yasopp and ends at Shanks, of course, which is converted to be 4 billion, I think the gap between each member is pretty similar, give or take, and of course going to be linear. So for Lucky Rue, I'm going to predict 2,777,000,000, which I think is a very respectable amount in One Piece and doesn't quite match Blackbeard, who's at 2.2 billion. And I mean, that's another emperor, right? And although Blackbeard's current bounty is going to increase so much more during the later stages of One Piece, I still think it'd be weird if Lucky Rue's was higher than his currently. Alright, next up we got Vice Captain Ben Beckman, and I have a lot of respect for this guy and just Vice Captains in general. They've been given that extra portrayal amongst crews with similar crew structures, such as Rayleigh, who Roger called his partner, and was also referred to as a legend in the same way Whitebeard was when Garp was talking about dealing with 2 legends at the same time back in the pre-time skip. Beckman is also considered the smartest character from the East Blue, and probably the biggest takeaway from his Viver card is the fact that it mentions his existence being comparable to red-haired Shanks. That says a lot, as well as being the moon to Shanks' son, who helps take care of things when Shanks can be reckless. That to me sounds a lot like partners as well, like we just referred to. And just like his captain, when they pulled up to Marineford, he was given a confrontation with a Navy Admiral as well. Although Beckman is a subordinate, he gives the feeling of more so a contemporary and a partner. So I think this info warrants him to have a pretty crazy bounty as well. I think Shanks' first mate should have a bounty around 3 billion, give or take. It could be a little less, a little more, but I'm going to go with 2.91 billion. So next up we have the abolished Warlords, who are no longer under the government's protection. And in my opinion, these bounties are going to be pretty crazy and pretty spread out because some of these warlords like Boa and Mihawk have been frozen for quite some time, and we are long overdue for an increase for those characters. But we are going to start with Buggy, and my guy Buggy has been building his empire throughout the entire post time skip. He's been, gaining a lot of territories and influence, and a lot of the events in the pre-time skip are the reason his reputation is perceived this way. His resume is actually pretty damn impressive from the outside, even if most of it is a gag. Former apprentice of Roger, rival, quote-unquote rival of red-haired Shanks, mastermind behind the Impel Down escape, the one who opened the gates of justice, broadcasted his plan to take down Whitebeard with the Denden Mushi, so I know Oda's going to continue this gag of Buggy gaining notoriety and influence. And at this stage in the game, I don't think it's a stretch to say Oda would give Buggy a bounty of 1 billion if he continues to keep him around this long. So next up we got Boa Hancock, and this one's tough for me because we don't exactly know what she would do now that she isn't under the world government's protection. I'm sure some way or another she'll attempt to ally with Luffy, if not flat out pulling up to Wano to assist them. She's also somebody who I consider to be pretty strong and underrated by some of the fandom. And in most shonen series, the law of natural story progression really helps and is in her favor, because usually the longer you wait for a character to go all out, the better that character is going to look just based off where you are in the story. And I do believe Boa to be the second strongest woman in the One Piece series behind Big Mom, and I think this warrants a respectable bounty. I could see Oda doing something funny like giving her the exact same bounty as Luffy, so I'm going to go with 1.5 billion. Alright, so next we got the self-proclaimed son of Whitebeard, Edward Weevil, and his case is pretty interesting because he already had a pretty high bounty of 480 million prior to becoming a warlord when it became frozen. So some have speculated that he might not get a massive increase due to there already being a reasonable and relatively accurate measure of his threat 2 years ago. But I still disagree just because of story progression purposes. We're getting late into the game and bounties have been going way, way up. So I think the same applies for Weevil, someone whose strength is considered to be that of a young Whitebeard. I know some of you may not take this statement at face value, but I definitely believe it has to at least warrant a formidable level of strength. I also believe that the main plotline surrounding Weevil, which has to do with the legacy of Whitebeard and how he's going after big names related to Whitebeard in order to gain his fortune, is a main factor in what a potential bounty for him could be. And I think this all eventually is setting up for him to eventually fight Marco the Phoenix. And I think he should have a similar bounty and strength level to Marco based on this. And if I had to guess, I'd probably say his new bounty will be around 1.75 billion, a little bit less than what I had for Marco. So next, we got the world's strongest swordsman, Dracul Hawkeye's Mihawk. And this one is going to be pretty crazy in my opinion. He's the only one of the former warlords who doesn't even have his original bounty revealed before it became frozen. And the reason is pretty obviously because Oda didn't want to reveal such a large bounty so early in the series. But now that Mihawk roams the seas free, what will his updated bounty be after so many years of it being frozen? Well, if we're talking individual strength alone, this wouldn't even be a question in my opinion. Mihawk is the goal for one of our main characters, Roronoa Zoro, and in a shonen series, it's never wise to underestimate the strength goals, especially when it comes to main characters and characters that are going to be narratively important later in the series. This is a man who frequently dueled with red-haired Shanks in what Whitebeard considered legendary duels. And words like that coming from Whitebeard hold a lot of weight, especially considering who this man saw in his prime. This is a guy who was on the same crew with Rocksteady Exebic, someone who was rivals to Roger, saw Garp in his prime. Oda even reassures this statement in an SBS when he called Mihawk, Shanks, and Whitebeard all legends. He put them all in the same category as legends. So now, even Mihawk himself is looking for a swordsman who can surpass his rival red-haired Shanks and give him that legendary duel that he hasn't had in such a long time. So if bounty was based off individual strength alone, I'd have him over 4 billion and even make the argument he could be ahead of most of the Yonko, but this is not a power scaling video, so I won't go too in-depth on that opinion. And the fact remains that Mihawk is a lone wolf. He has no territory, no crewmates, nor does he actively seek to find the One Piece or involve himself in the political affairs of the world, all of which are important factors when you're determining your overall threat level and the bounty you possess. So I definitely believe that Mihawk still warrants an extremely high bounty due to how strong he is and him being Zoro's endgame goal, and I think Oda really needs to hype that up soon since we are getting into the endgame. But I don't see it being higher than any of the Yonko as of right now due to all the reasons I stated before. I see him definitely being over 3 billion, but probably under 4 billion, so my prediction at this point is probably around 3.7 billion. So now it's time for the Revolutionary Army members. I know there's not a lot of information on some of them, but as of right now, I think we can still make some accurate guesses here. I've personally always viewed the Revs as having a similar structure to a Yonko crew, specifically more like Big Mom and Kaido's crews, having a leader who far exceeds the rest in bounty and strength, as well as having a small number of other formidable individuals or commanders. And in the Revs case, they seem to have about 4 to 5 commanders, all representing a north, south, east, and west region, as well as having Ivankov, and then of course Sabo, who is the chief of staff, and considered the number 2. And I expect the Revs to have some pretty high bounties, since they are of course not just normal criminals, they are not pirates, but they are an organization who is actively trying to overthrow the world government. So the first bounty I'm going to predict is Bello Betty, the Eastern Army commander, and she's the wielder of the Kobu Kobu no Mi, which essentially allows her to raise other people's fighting spirits and physical strength, a very useful ability. And obviously, there's not a lot of information about most of these guys, like I just said. But the reason I'm just going to predict Betty the lowest for now is because she wasn't chosen to be on the front lines in Marijua, so I guess you could kind of conclude she's not quite as combat-oriented as the other 3 commanders, and likely wouldn't be in as many confrontational or a scenario in which her threat level is likely to be perceived accurately by the world government. But even so, I believe that the lowest bounty of the Revolutionary Commander should at least warrant something around 605 million. So the next one I'm thinking is Morley, the giant of the Revolutionaries, who has the Oshi Oshi no Mi, allowing him to have a pretty useful skill set in infiltration, pushing and basically manipulating the ground to some extent. He even was confirmed by Oda in SBS to have been the one to basically create level 5.5 Impel Down, so I can definitely see now why Dragon has a use for his skill set. So the bounty I'm thinking for Morley is around 725 million. So next up we got Lindbergh, who commands the Southern Army, and he doesn't seem to have a devil fruit but instead be a mink, which obviously suggests that he's pretty combat oriented and has a lot of cool abilities up his sleeve. Obviously likely meaning that he's very skilled in Electro, as well as being able to transform into a Sulon if it's a full moon, which would be very crazy to see. And he also seems to be very talented and skilled as an inventor, creating lots of weapons, gadgets, all of this advanced technology that he also incorporates into his combat abilities. And of course he was part of the team with Sabo, Morley, and Karasu, who hid underground and tried to rescue Kuma, which involved battling with the admirals on the 4th day of the Reverie. And we don't know exactly what went down. Obviously the news said that Sabo was dead, which many people think is cap, and it probably is. But as of right now, I'm just trying to gauge an accurate threat level of what they should be. I'm not really factoring in the events of Marijua into this bounty. I think this bounty is what they had before. And for Lindbergh, I'm thinking it's going to be 840 million. So next up is the Northern Army Commander Karasu, and the reason I think he has the highest of the 4 is honestly nothing too concrete. I just think this guy looks badass as fuck, man, like if I'm being real. He just gives off the energy and vibe that he's a serious dude who gets stuff done and is very, very strong in combat. He seems to have a devil fruit that allows him to turn his body and clothes into crows, which gives him a lot of unique skill sets. Obviously, infiltrating is one of them, which it seems that these guys all kind of specialize in because they wouldn't be able to sneak around so effectively as the Revolutionary Army if they weren't skilled in infiltration. But it also seems to give him very good combat abilities as shown in the battle against the Pinkbeard pirates. So I'm thinking Karasu's bounty will be about 900 million. Alright, next we got the Goat Okama, Emporio Ivankov, and he's the commander of what's called the G Army of the Revolutionaries, which covers the Grand Line. So I think it's fair to assume that Ivankov's role is slightly bigger than the other 4, and that his bounty is going to be slightly higher than theirs as well. Especially if you just think of the overall grand scheme of the narrative, like Ivankov has been a more prominent character in One Piece than the rest of the 4 who were just introduced recently. We know Ivankov was heavily involved in the escape of Impel Down, which was a very worldwide event. It's something that's very well known in the world, something that should have raised his bounty by a lot because he managed to escape from it. Ivankov is also definitely very combat oriented, very strong. Obviously challenged Sanji to defeat his 99 masters of the new Kama Tempo for the secret recipe. So I just think, based on Ivankov's connections to some of our main characters, that it makes more sense for him to have the highest bounty. So I don't think it's crazy to say that Eva's bounty could be over $1 billion now. I'm going to go with 1,020 million. Alright, next is Chief of Staff Sabo. Obviously the brother of Monkey D. Luffy and Porkus D. Ace. So what should Sabo's threat level be? We know that it was actually answered earlier by Oda to be 602 million, which is actually pretty fitting since it's a little bit more than Ace, who was at 550 million in the post-time skip. And it was also more than Luffy's on Dressrosa, which was 500 million after the events of that. And I think Sabo's bounty probably should have increased after that. Remember, I'm not talking about Marijois and the current events of the Reverie. These are my bounty opinions on what their threat level should be going into that event. Like, how should Sabo be perceived going into that event? And I think based off Dressrosa, when he did fairly well against Fujitora, and just his overall role in the story, supposed to be, you know, that big brother figure to Luffy, I also consider him someone to have a similar ceiling to Ace as far as potential goes. And we all know Ace had potential to be the Pirate King, which means I think Sabo should probably have potential to at least be Yonko level end of series and be considered a legitimate threat. I still think Sabo should be considered a bigger threat than Luffy as of right now. Obviously that will change soon. So that's why I decided to go with 1,602 million, because it barely puts him above Luffy and still gives him that, you know, big brother feeling, that role that Ace was supposed to fulfill and be the protective brother. So I'm sure Luffy will surpass him soon, but as of right now, I still think Sabo should be a little bit higher. Alright, time for arguably the most hype bounty in the series when we finally figure it out, and I'm pretty confident that Dragon, being the world's worst criminal, will warrant being the highest bounty in the history of One Piece. There's honestly not much point in going too in-depth about this. This guy is literally the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army who is attempting to overthrow the world government and likely knows so many dangerous secrets about the world. I also don't think his bounty is solely on knowledge. I think it's a combination of both, because we all know that individual strength is a factor in your bounty. It's not the only factor, but it is a factor. And I'm of the opinion that Dragon can definitely back it up when it comes to strength as well. I have him at least equal to the Yonko in strength. You know, he's the MC's father. In a shonen series, what does that mean? That always means something good. Those guys always live up to the hype. He's also the son of Monkey D. Garp, the legendary marine hero. We all know Garp was a rival to the Pirate King Gold Roger. We all know Luffy is going to be the Pirate King. So Dragon could honestly represent Luffy's future as well as Garp's past. There's no reason that this guy should not be considered one of the greatest threats in the history of One Piece. And in my opinion, it's the highest. There were so many debates for years on if Dragon or Gold Roger would have a higher bounty. And I think chapter 957 kind of clarified that, because it said that Roger and Whitebeard had the highest bounties in the history of piracy. And we all know Dragon does not fall under that category. And we all know that Dragon is not a pirate. He is actively seeking to overthrow the world government, which in my opinion, regardless of who you think is stronger, warrants a bigger threat level to them. So I think Dragon has the highest bounty in the history of One Piece, but I gave him a bounty high that doesn't undermine Gold Roger's crazy bounty of 5.5 billion. So I think Dragon's bounty is around 5.8 billion. And with Dragon, that's going to conclude today's bounty predictions. I know there are still some other characters that have unknown bounties, but I think I covered most of the biggest mysteries and the ones that people most want to see in the world. But if more information comes about certain characters, I'll definitely be making another bounty prediction video. Per usual, I appreciate you guys all checking this out. Let me know what you think of my bounty predictions, if I wanked anyone, if I underrated anyone, and whose reveal you're most looking forward to seeing. Would also appreciate you guys hit that like and subscribe button so I can continue to grow this channel. I'm having a lot of fun doing so, and once again, I greatly appreciate you guys checking this out. I'm Jagan, and I'll see you guys next time.